Molina de Comunicaciones, quien nos va a ayudar con el streaming en el canal de YouTube de la universidad. Federico, adelante. Si de pronto nos confirma por acá que el streaming comience. Okay, so we are live now. A very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today for this second CodeSwitch session of the semester. CodeSwitch is a space conceived by the bilingual education program at Universidad Tecnológica de Pereira with two very specific intentions. The first intention is for us to switch out of our duties and responsibilities and roles of everyday life as students or as teachers or as researchers, and to come here together and reunite around interesting, innovative ideas. The second purpose that CodeSwitch has is to kind of like turn off that a switch of misconceptions around research as an activity that for many could be, on the one hand, difficult and challenging, or on the other, it could be dull or perceived as not very desirable. It is our purpose here in this space, whose slogan is turning on language education research to motivate, to disseminate new studies, interesting studies in our field, so that not only professors and researchers are motivated to explore this area, but that also students, in particular undergraduate students, get a glimpse into what research means and how powerful it can be. For today's session, we have two very special guests. Well, not only two, I would say they are the main presenters, because we also have with them some of their either colleagues or co-researchers that are part of some research incubators or seedbeds coming from Medellin. Let me introduce them. We have here, this is from Universidad Católica Luis Amigó, Professor José Vicente Abad. He's a teacher, educator, a teacher and researcher in the area of language teaching. He's part of CILEX, Construcciones Investigativas en Lenguas Extranjeras, which is a research line belonging to ALEX, the research group of School of Education and Humanities at Universidad Católica Luis Amigó. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Modern Languages and a Master of Arts in Education. He's currently completing his doctorate in education from Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana in Medellin. So he's joining us today as the head or main researcher of this study, but he's accompanied by Jennifer Daniela Regalado Chicaiza. She's a professional in English teaching from the same university, Universidad Católica Luis Amigó, and she's an active member of the research seedbed training for language teachers in 2017. So Jennifer and Professor Abad have been working together for a while now, as they are going to tell us in a little bit. It is an immense pleasure to welcome you today to this second session of the semester with your presentation called Pedagogical Relationships and Identities in Research Incubators, Reconceptualizing Research Training for Language Teachers. I know this is going to be not only informational, but very inspirational for all of us here present. A very warm welcome to you, and please, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Juan Manuel, for your warm welcome. We're delighted to be here and for having the opportunity to share with you, with the students at Universidad Tecnológica de Pereira, some of what we have been doing, some of what we have been researching, and our experience with formative research, specifically with the figure of research seedbeds or research incubators. I'm going then to proceed and share the screen with our presentation and tell us a little bit about what we've been doing. Right. So as you mentioned, the title of our presentation is Pedagogical Relationships and Identities in Research Incubators, Reconceptualizing research training for language teachers. We've been part of research incubators for a while. I have been a coordinator of research incubators for since 2011, so for a while, around 12 years. With me today is Jennifer. She's also been a part of that semillero. Jenny, do you want to say something about you before we start?
Okay, and no, I just want to say no, thank you very much for this great opportunity. As I have shared before with our professors, this is really a meaningful opportunity that we can have every time, continue learning from each other. So I'm really very grateful for this meaningful opportunity, meaningful space to learn with everyone here. Thanks a lot.
All right. So I think the essence of our question was what happens with the relationships between teachers or tutors and students in formative research, particularly within the space of our research seedbed or research incubator, as we call them, and what happens with the identity construction of student teachers, novice teachers who are learning to do research. So we're going to share with you today some of what we have been doing. So our presentation will be divided in this section where we will start with a general introduction. Then we will describe the methodology of at least one of the studies that we conducted, because there have been a series of studies, but at least, let's say, the last one. Share with you some of the findings of our study. As a result of this series of studies that we have conducted, we came up with a theoretical model to describe pedagogical relationships, especially in formative research. So we will share some elements of that theory with you and finish with the discussion. And then, of course, we're going to open up the space for questions or comments or reactions. So to begin, the problem.
Thank you very much. Well, so here, let's share about the research training in our problem. In the past, for example, the research training was something optional. Currently, this is something mandatory. At the beginning, it was optional with the general education law, but in 2017, with the resolution 18583, where training teachers as researchers is something mandatory. And there are different ways how we can receive this training. And this is what we call the complementary path. We have the regular and the alternative path. Let's review about it. With the regular path, we refer to the research courses that the students have to take. That is part of the regular plan of the studies, and usually this leads us to the completion of our graduation paper, of our thesis, and this is something that is mandatory. The other path is the alternative to receive this training. The alternative path includes those assistantships, the tutoring, the semilleros de investigación, that is the research incubators. And about those research incubators, in our Colombia's higher education have been very essential, but there is just little research what we have about the impact of the research incubators in the identity construction of those language teachers as researchers, and that is why we decide to investigate about this problem.
All right, and something important to say is that the term semilleros have been around for a while, for at least 25, 30 years. They're a very local form of approaching formative research. And there are different ways to refer to them in English. A very common one in our country is research seedbeds, and you can certainly go ahead and call them that way. Other people have called them, for example, student research lab or student research groups. The reason why we call them research incubators, at least in our publications, is that when we started investigating about it, we realized that in some international publications, especially in medicine, some people have published about this concept, and they use the word research incubator because it has a greater resonance internationally. You probably know or you don't know about this, but Semilleros tend to be very local, and they're a powerful movement, especially in Latin America. But if you talk with people from the United States or Europe about research seed beds, they don't really know what the whole thing is about. If you tell them about research incubators, they're more likely to get an idea of what it's about. But we can call them in different ways. All right, with that sort of clarification, an important concept for us is research training. As Jenny mentioned, research training is fundamental in teacher education, and it has become mandatory in all of our licenciatura programs and all teacher education programs at all levels. Because through research training, the whole point is developing a critical attitude and a creative ability in teachers and students according to our laws and regulations. But the whole idea about research training is sort of contributing to the creation and production of scientific knowledge, innovation, and social and cultural development, and introducing teachers into the culture of research, because that's a way we can actually transform our practices and our school realities. All right, another element that we have is formative research. There has been a long discussion in our country about types of research, and we have formative research on one hand, and then on the other hand, we have scientific research. Formative research, in the traditional definition, follows similar steps as scientific research, but as opposed to scientific research that focuses on scientific production, the whole purpose of formative research is to have novel researchers learn about research by doing research, by engaging in research so that they can become active research agents. This is based on the concept by Restrepo Gomez, who developed it, and Miyahira Arakaki, for example. And we have this concept. Jenny.
Thank you, Professor. The research incubators. Those traditionally had been called as academia spaces, but for us, this is so much more than this. These constitute what we call a learning community. And what characterizes those research incubators? That they also receive the institutional support for research training. And those research incubators are composed by a group of students and even for graduates. And usually there are leads, by a research tutor. And oftentimes that tutor plays a role of a research mentor. Another characteristic that we have of research incubator is that they follow a collaborative and a cooperative approach to research that training, and is also learning how to do research in specific disciplines. In our case, we learn to do research in language teaching.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
Objective is to analyze the pedagogical relationship between research incubator coordinators and students in light of the theory of mentoring and its influence of the identity construction of pre-service teachers regarding their research training.
Now let's talk a little bit about the method that we follow for our last study.
Thank you, Professor. With the methodology, what we call a case with a unit of analysis is according to SK in 1995 until Gini in 2013. To generate an extended awareness, and deeper understanding of a complex phenomenon, problem, or program by analyzing in detail a specific aspect of it as they play out within in a real context. For research design. When we talk about this part, there are important essential elements to mention. They are the sampling, that is how we select the participants. The other element is the data collection, and the other one is the data analysis. For the sampling, we use what is called that criteria and key informant sampling. So all the participants for this research project have to meet certain criteria. These are: all of them have to be members of a research incubator from the English teaching program at Luis Amigo Catholic University. And the coordinators must be coordinating the research incubator for at least 2 years, and the students who participate must to be members of the research incubator for at least 1 year under the same guide of this coordinator. Then we proceed with the data collection. Once that we have selected all the participants, we had 4 coordinators and 8 students from the research incubators. With the coordinators, we conduct a semi-structured interviews, and with the students, we conduct focus groups. We develop 2 focus groups. The focus group 1 include 3 students, and the focus group 2 include 5 students. For our data analysis, we use an integrating approach following Curry in 2015. And that means that we were first assembling the data. Once that the data was assembled, we start to open coding, assigning some codes based on a category structure. Then we proceed to categorize those codes in a matrix. And then we include the evidence and extract from the text of each of those codes. Then start to find the relationships between in the categories and in fact between the categories. That was the relating part. Finally, we started to create the interpretation, which is basically how we construct the findings.
All right. So with that summary of what we've been doing, something important to mention here is that, as we said before, this was our last study, not the latest, because we're now working on other studies also on semilleros. But we had conducted a previous really big study that was a systematization research working with 51 semilleros from our institution. At the beginning, it was research seedbeds or incubators from different programs and schools in our university. And later, we focused specifically on semilleros for the English program. And so what we found is what we want to share with you. So an important element to discuss concerning these pedagogical relationships is that in our eyes, coordinators, the leaders of these groups, oftentimes become research mentors. And mentors play a fundamental role in research training. Mentors, according to Malderez and Bodowski, are acculturators, sponsors, models, educators, and supporters. And that means that, unlike other teachers, they play very key roles in the development of the researcher. So let's take a look at what we found. First, when we say that the coordinators are mentors, and as mentors they are supporters, it means that they engage with the students at an emotional level. And so they accompany the students through the research process by providing emotional support, and they help them through the ups and downs of the training process, because it's not linear and it's not always stable. There are times when we are excited about research. There are times when we are not so sure about it, when we might even be scared or disappointed or discouraged. So it's important to have that emotional support. One of the students, for example, says, as you can see there, that the coordinator was always motivating them and having them believe in their ability to do research. And that was very important. Mentors, research mentors, are also acculturators. That means that they introduce the students into the research culture. They sort of usher the students into learning to do research. As you see in the evidence, they are guides that walk along with the students in the process of doing research. So it's not just having them do homework and research assignments. It's investigating with them and walking alongside them to show them how to do research. They're also sponsors, and that role often goes beyond and outside the classroom, because being a sponsor means that you use all of the resources that you have as a teacher, all of the pedagogical resources, to facilitate the incorporation of these new researchers into professional communities. So, for example, by going with the students to academic events or writing and publishing with students, activities that certainly go beyond the classroom. One of the professors said, for example, that he's a facilitator, a catalyst, and a mediator, and part of his role was validating students' knowledge and helping them shape their ideas.
Another findings, the aptitudes and competencies. In Research Incubator, the students have the opportunity to develop those competencies and aptitudes for research, the FARIA and the ALISO 2006. And these include the autonomy, the critical thinking, the self-confidence, the teamwork, and scientific curiosity. Let's review about every one of them. For example, related with autonomy, we found that the research incubator has touched to the students, not just to settle it for what is given so easily, but because of all the activities, all the tasks that we develop in a research incubator that make us go beyond what we already know. And that inspires us, motivates us to be more autonomous, to research, to look for ourselves. The second one, the critical thinking. The research incubator has led to the students to develop that critical thinking, that the research incubator has caused that complete, that positive impact transformation on what they believe, to transform and to create new knowledge. The scientific curiosity. The participation in research incubator sparked that curiosity for research. And according to the development of our tasks, of our labors in a research incubator, we can rise and open that desire of the curiosity for investigating. Mm-hmm. The self-confidence. Here we arrive to one of very special point. I'm going to read what we found. I was not very confident, but my coordinator has made me develop more security in me as a person and as a teacher. Here we are mentioning not just factors about academic, about how to research. Here we are mentioning fundamental and significant point that make us believe in a research incubator as a learning community from that closeness that we can perceive here as human beings. Then we have the teamwork, something fundamental, very essential in the development of a research incubator. What taught us that the things can be done by ourselves, but they are things that requires the cooperation, the collaborative work with other people. And that is what we mean with a learning community, where we can work by a teamwork and develop something else from our experiences, from our knowledge, and making that cooperation of an integration.
Fantastic. Okay, so as you guys can see, research incubators are quite powerful in redefining pedagogical relationships, the way that teacher educators and student teachers connect, interact with each other. And they do have an impact in the construction of novel teachers' identities as researchers. But since we have been studying this for a while, over time, we develop a theoretical model to explain pedagogical relationships. Remember that we're studying education. So our main question is, how do we educate other people? How do we really learn? And we're concerned about the role of teachers and the relationships that we create with students. So in order to explain pedagogical relationships, especially in formative research, we came up with this model that takes some elements from the theory of mentoring, but broaden that perspective. In order to understand this model, it's important to have some basic definitions of certain terms that we use. The first term is the relational context. By context in this model, we're not referring so much to the physical space of the classroom, but rather to the symbolic and interactional network of meanings that we create when we have a relationship teacher-student. And this relational context is defined around two axes, the axis of power and the axis of affect. What we realize is that those two elements are always present in any pedagogical relationship to varying degrees. The other element is directionality. By directionality, we refer to the circulation of knowledge in that community, in that group. And that also entails the distribution of power. Who makes decisions concerning the curriculum? Who makes decisions concerning what to learn and how? And because it has to do with the axis of with power, directionality is a variable that is marked on this axis of power, because it reflects the social distance or the social closeness between the teacher and the students. The other element is closeness, which is basically the degree of emotional connection and affinity between the teacher and the students. And because it revolves around this sort of emotional connection, is marked on the axis of affect, because it defines the rapport and the level of personal engagement between the actors of the pedagogical act, the students and the teacher. To better explain this, we use this graph. So you can see this Cartesian plane, these two coordinates. You have the vertical coordinate, the y coordinate, and this is the axis of power. And then you have the horizontal axis, which is the axis of affect. And depending on the degrees of power and affect, you can identify where is any pedagogical relationship. So on the axis of power, we sort of locate the variable of directionality. And on the axis of affect, we locate the variable of closeness. And so this really creates an entire continuum of possibilities to help understand how is the relationship between teachers and students. But let's say that the outer limits of that continuum could be defined around the way we understand knowledge. So there are more individualistic approaches to research training, and usually these approaches are knowledge-centered. What we mean by knowledge-centered is that knowledge is usually understood as a fixed cultural construct. And so the role of the teacher is basically to transmit knowledge, and the role of the students is to receive, sometimes passively, that knowledge and reproduce that knowledge. And that happens across all areas, but certainly with research, when we're learning about research theory or research methodology. That's not wrong. We're not saying that one is good and the other one is bad. It's just that there are different ways of approaching research education. And as you can see in knowledge-centered approaches, the relationship between teachers and students tends to be more vertical, and there is greater social distance. Think, for example, about a research seminar when a single teacher has 30, 50, 90 students. You have many students in the classroom, but the relationship is very vertical. And then there is very limited opportunity for that emotional connection. Hardly ever teachers get to learn the name of 90 students in a seminar. So that's usually what happens. But then you have another option, which are more closer to a collective approach to research education. And in these collective approaches, the focus is not so much on knowledge as a fixed construct that pre-exists, but rather the focus is on the community of knowers. And both teachers and students are knowers. Both of them are engaged in learning. So this approach is focused more on the knowers as they collectively engage in the process of constructing and building knowledge. So knowledge is not necessarily seen as something that pre-exists. Of course, we're taking elements from the culture, but we're also engaging in the process of creating our own understandings. All right, something else to say is there are certain elements that help us understand these approaches. Some of the criteria you can see in this table is, as we mentioned before, directionality, decision-making, emotional closeness, and interactional focus. So in knowledge-centered, usually more traditional approaches to research training, the directionality is unidirectional. As I mentioned before, it sort of means that for the most part of the class, the teacher is the one who possesses knowledge, and his role is to transmit. So the way in which knowledge flows is very vertical, and it's sort of unidirectional most of the time. And remember, this is not black or white. It's an entire continuum. But the decision-making tends to be very vertical, which means that the teacher makes most of the decisions concerning the curriculum, what to learn and how. There is, as we mentioned before, limited emotional closeness, not because teachers don't want, but oftentimes because it's just hard. As we mentioned before, if you have very large classes with 90 students or more in our university, we have seminars like those. It's very hard to get that personal connection. And even though you may have 30 or 40 or 50 or 90 students, the trend or the approach tends to be more individualistic. It's sort of like you're learning by yourself. In this more knower-centered approaches, the directionality is bidirectional or multidirectional. When you are in a research incubator, it's not just a teacher dictating what needs to be learned. Everyone is learning from one another. So as Freire said, the teacher is also learning from the students, and the students are also teaching. And so because of these emphases, the relationship between students and teachers tend to be more horizontal. It doesn't mean that there is no leadership. Of course, the teacher is an authority figure, and there is always the element of power and affect, but it's sort of diminished or diffused a little bit. And so there is more distribution of power, and part of the responsibility for making decisions about what to learn is sort of communicated to the students. There is greater closeness for a number of reasons, but we were telling Juan Manuel, Jenny has been in this semillero since 2017. So we get to spend a lot of time together, not just for one semester. We are together for years. And so as a result, we get to know each other really well. We get very close. We know about each other's personal lives. And that's why we have more possibilities to develop that degree of closeness. And in these knower-centered approaches, they tend to be more collaborative in nature. It means that you're working as a team and not individually. And this has very important implications for research training. So let's move on to the discussion, and maybe we can have some time for questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Professor. Well, the collaborative approaches to formative research, Hakarainen et al. 2016, in relatively small learning communities, such as those research incubators that we had mentioned, this theory appeared to support the research mentoring. The pedagogical relationships in research incubators that favor the aptitudes and competencies after all the development that we can have in those research incubators that are fundamentals in our autonomy, critical thinking, self-confidence, teamwork, and scientific curiosity are promoted after this participation and integration with the members in a research incubator. Mm-hmm. The differential elements, such as a small class size, as our professor Jose Vicente has mentioned, here we have the opportunity to be very close with each other. Here we evidence of the closeness that we develop, not just in academic, in a research, but in a personal, in a human way. And so how we can construct ourselves in all those factors. The flexible and temporal spatial conditions. Here, for example, as we mentioned, the research incubators are composed by students and by graduates. And when graduates start with their labor's life, sometimes could be difficult, for example, to attend the research incubators meetings face-to-face. So here we have other options like the virtual meetings or the hybrid meetings where we can continue. And so this gives us the great opportunity Yes, the meaningful opportunity to continue being part of a research incubator, continue training ourselves in those different dimensions for teaching and learning are advantages towards the formation of democratic pedagogical relationships. However, are not just the single explanation for effective research mentoring. And here we have with a collective. In these collective approaches, such as those the research incubators, what occurs is not only just a pedagogical change. Here we can experience an epistemological change in the way that we approach and understand the knowledge. It's not just as we have shared before. It's not just where the teacher is the central one with the knowledge and just the students are going to be the receptors of that knowledge. But here, because now this is something traditional, we are moving from that traditional path to something that is the understanding of knowledge in a more continuous and fluid understanding, where the focus is that community of learning, is that community of people who come together to build that new knowledge, new theories. And there is the epistemological change, what we can experience in that understand what it means to learn and how to learn.
Fantastic. But as Jennifer mentioned, the only explanation for these changes in research seedbeds is not just the fact that there are small communities of learners that are researching together for extended periods of time. There are other elements that we should take into consideration to understand the why of this epistemological and pedagogical shift. One of those elements is the communal nature of learning, directed towards the resolution of real problems. Look, I teach traditional classes. I teach also traditional research classes. But something that is really fascinating about teaching research and engaging with students in doing research is that nobody has the final answer from the beginning. So I can't just give you a test and see if you know or you don't know. We are embarked on the process of discovery. And so that makes it, genuine, sort of scary sometimes, but genuine engagement in the resolution of real problems. There is, with regard to evaluation, the presence of integrative over compartmentalized assessment and formative over summative assessment. I think a way to explain this is, yes, you are the teacher, but you work like a coach who's training a team, and then they go play. And depending on how they played in that match, they won or they lost, whatever happened. When we come back and get together, the assessment is not just the teacher evaluating the students, it is how we did as a team. So it's more integrative because the assessment is for the whole community and it tends to be more formative. So for example, here we're speaking English, but we're not dividing the skills. We're not sort of like saying, okay, let's evaluate listening or speaking. No, we are just engaging in the real use of the language for genuine, real communication purposes. And so it turns to be, once again, integrative and very formative. The other element has to do with the traditional roles that we play as students and teachers. Because in these communities of learners, those roles are diffused and sometimes they're overlapping. So as I mentioned before, yes, I am the teacher and I do have some knowledge that I want to share with students, but they also know things that I probably don't know about regarding, for example, the use of technology or certain topics that they might be more familiar with than I am. So we're learning from each other. There is greater distribution of power, and so it's multi-directional flow of knowledge. And as we mentioned before, there's increased emotional closeness, which I think is very important because, let's admit it, learning to do research can be hard. And it can be nerve-wracking, and it can be discouraging, and it can be confusing. So it's nice to have a community of people right there with you, supporting you through that process. So that said, most recently, we published the results of our research in Profile Journal. We're very happy and proud to be able to share all of this information, and we are inviting you, if you're more interested in learning about what we have been doing, to go ahead and take a look at our research, our article. And we also have a video in Profile's website. So if you want to take a look at that video, fantastic. That's it for us for our presentation. Thank you so much for listening to us. Once again, I'm Jose Vicente Abad, and she's Jennifer. And now we're going to open up the space if there are any comments or questions or things that you might want to share or discuss with us.
Thank you very much.
Professor Abad, and a junior researcher, although not very junior anymore, Jennifer, thank you so much for coming and join us today in this second session of the semester. I believe this has been absolutely rich and fruitful. Of course, this is the moment for meaningful exchanges, for generating some conversation in these last 15 minutes with God. Of course, this space was conceived mainly having in mind members of research incubators also at the university. So this is the moment, right? As the presentation suggests, there's here a vast realm of opportunities to develop these competencies that have to do with scientific curiosity and autonomy. So this is the moment. This is the moment to kind of like embrace that invitation and to start asking questions. So I'm also taking advantage that Jennifer is sharing the video. Oh, you also share. Perfect. Great. I wanted to share the article.
You know, when we get to this point,
yes, please.
You allow sometimes students, it's not that they don't have questions, it's just that they are processing. But I do want to say, guys, if you want to ask your questions in English, fine. If you want to ask in Spanish, that's fine too. If you want to write in the chat your questions, that's okay. So however you feel comfortable. One initiating question would be, is anyone here a part of a semillero? Any of the participants here has been a part or is part of a semillero? Would be a good starting question. Angelica.
Yeah, good afternoon, Professor and Jennifer and Professor Juan Manuel. Thank you very much for this talk. I think this is very interesting. I am a professor of research design of the Licenciatura, which is the second course of research that they have to take. And I am with the students of this subject today here listening to you. I know that some of the students from the course belong to research incubators or research seedbeds, as we call them here in our program. I think this is very interesting. Thank you very much for sharing with us for this opportunity to get to understand this a little bit better for all of us, right? I know Juana Bustamante, Oriana, and Dana Huitrago, and Jaime Ortiz, they belong to Semilleros de Investigación from the program, and they are connected here. I don't know why maybe they're so shy to talk. I want to take this opportunity to ask you, maybe when I was listening to you, I was thinking like, okay, this is a subject of the Licenciatura, but maybe we can consider this subject as an incubator, because actually we develop all of those processes of joining the students with the idea of designing their project and the methodology, the justification and everything, and all the proposals, so they then can actually go and implement their projects. But what do you think about it? Do you think that we can probably take this subject as a research incubator, even though it doesn't have like all the elements of a constituted semillero de investigación? How can I balance those ideas?
I think that's a fantastic question. Something to say along those lines is that when we started writing, when we were actually writing the article, One of the evaluators, you probably know the process, but sometimes you get reviews or evaluations that you say, oh my goodness, this has nothing to do with what we're writing. This is so mean, so rude. But sometimes the evaluators have a point and you say, oh my goodness, we really have to check this because that makes sense. And something that the evaluators said was, do not be so Manichaean, like this is black or white. So it's not like semilleros are the perfect world and the traditional research classes are, terrible. That's not true. Something we have to say, for example, is mentorship is likely to happen in semilleros, but it's not the only place for mentorship. So in your class, your research class, you can become a mentor. You can create communities. And we at Luis Amigo, we're trying to do that. I think that the whole point is, what can we learn from these communities of learning, from this incubator, these seed beds, that we can sort of replicate in our classes? Something that we could do, for example, and you probably do it, I don't know what's your case, in our university, we try to do that, and we emphasize on the importance of working in teams for their graduation project. And sometimes students don't get it, but when you see theories like this one, and you see the implications of working with other people and constructing knowledge with other people, then it makes sense. So it's not just because it's practical for teachers, for the assessment. There are more powerful and profound reasons for having students working in teams. Another thing that we're trying to do is that the tutor that is accompanying those courses, we have six, we call them Maestro Investigador, 6 courses, which are part of the practicum. And that teacher, the teacher, we try that they accompany the students for at least the last 3 or last 4 courses. So you're going to be with the same teacher for at least a year and a half, because part of the difficulty is when students are changing from one teacher to the other, sort of you lose the continuity of the process and the possibility to have a stronger relationship with students. So that would be our recommendation. I know administratively is not always easy because, there are administrative matters, contracts, and all that stuff. But pedagogically, if it were possible to move in that direction, I think that would facilitate the emergence of a more collective approach in our regular research courses, because the teachers are working with those groups of students for extended periods of time. I hope that answers your question, at least in part. I don't know if Jenny has something to say, but thank you for the question. That's a great question.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. And you guys, if you want to ask or comment in English or Spanish, también hablamos español, entonces que la lengua no sea una barrera, sino un puente de comunicación. Entonces, si alguno quiere participar en inglés o en español, go ahead. Remember that we're doing translanguaging now. So we use English and Spanish together. We mix them up. So go ahead, go for it.
Well, let us see. Well, they maybe craft one question and they take the initiative. I would like myself to ask a question, and this time more directly to Jennifer, because I believe this in a way is a talk very much directed to these novice teachers, as we call them, or these novice researchers more, right? And I think the question for Jennifer would be, how do you believe the experience of making part or taking part of a process that is connected to research, how do you feel this has contributed to you in the construction of that identity? Because this is something that I feel is really fascinating and that I really discuss a lot with my students. It's like that they try always to question themselves as who they are. and who they are inside the academic community, inside not only the university, but as being part of the program. So you as a novice researcher and as a researcher that since 2017, has gained significant experience, as Professor Abad mentioned, how do you believe this process has kind of like nurtured you in your identity?
Muchas gracias, profesor. Me gustaría compartirlo en español, en esa forma los demás también se puedan sentir más cercanos, ¿no? Y pudiesen también animarse a participar en sus preguntas. Bueno, primero que todo empezar a compartir, ¿no? Desde esa identidad docente, que uno la menciona identidad docente y tal vez permea de una, ¿no? La palabra docente. Pero entonces hemos encontrado en la teoría de que esa identidad docente viene permeada, pero iniciemos desde la identidad de la persona que somos, desde el ámbito social, el contexto familiar, nuestras creencias a nivel religioso. Todo lo que permea la identidad como una persona, ello también va a influenciar, ¿no? en nuestro desarrollo docente, en la identidad docente que estamos en proceso de desarrollo y que es una constante evolución. No es algo de que llegué a tal semestre o terminé mi carrera de licenciatura y ya he obtenido mi identidad, ¿no? Mi perfil docente. Es algo que se va permeando, se va transformando de acuerdo a cada experiencia que vivenciamos en el aula, con nuestros estudiantes, desde nuestra actividad académica, el repensarnos, ¿no? El reflexionar sobre nuestras actividades pedagógicas que llevamos a cabo. Y aquí entonces justo estamos también en un proyecto de elaboración que vamos a compartir aquí rápidamente, es el proyecto de Novice Teachers, y esta es una de las preguntas incluso que venimos también abordando aquí en el proyecto. Tal vez, profe José, ¿desea compartir algo en este momento?
Algo muy bonito es que fíjense que, por ejemplo, Jennifer está liderando ese proyecto. Entonces ya no soy yo el que lidera, sino que, claro, yo empiezo, pero ahora Jenny es investigadora que lidera proyectos dentro del semillero y la van a acompañar otros estudiantes, pero es muy bonito, muy satisfactorio ver, después de todo este tiempo, cuando Jennifer, por ejemplo, está explicando cómo se hace el análisis de datos, o cuando está elaborando conceptualmente en inglés o en español, o cuando ya empieza a liderar un proyecto. Porque yo pienso que la labor del formador es lograr que ese que se está formando también para ser maestro e investigador se convierta en tu par. Tú realmente dices, logré mi misión, si ese que se estaba formando pues llega a ser maestro en ejercicio y hace su práctica docente. Y si estás formando en investigación, verlos convertirse en investigadores, es decir, súper, aquí se está logrando algo fantástico. Entonces, eso es algo lindo de los semilleros que celebro y de lo que me siento muy orgulloso. Entonces, sí, ahí les contamos parte de la vida de nuestro semillero, es que tenemos graduados. Creo que algo importante para mencionar de ese proyecto de Novice Teachers es que incluso en nuestra definición, los Novice Teachers son justo después de graduarse y los primeros años de inserción en la vida laboral. A veces hay una desconexión muy grande, ¿cierto? Porque estamos habituados a la vida universitaria, al acompañamiento del profe, y de pronto me gradúo y tengo que ser el profesor, ya no soy el practicante. Entonces, eso, la investigación ha mostrado que esos primeros años de inserción en la vida laboral son duros, son complejos, a veces cambiamos de empleo, a veces no nos contratan tan rápido, ya somos docentes en propiedad, y justo en esos momentos críticos los profes pierden a veces sus redes de apoyo. Entonces, por ejemplo, algo lindo es que el semillero puede seguir siendo una red de apoyo, y creo que ahí tenemos que empezar a ampliar nuestra concepción de semillero. Porque después de 25, 30 años de los movimientos de semilleros, empezamos a decir, bueno, es que no es solamente para el pregrado. Entonces ya los estudiantes de posgrados, de maestrías y doctorados, viendo la potencia de estos enfoques colectivos, estamos incorporando estudiantes de maestrías y de doctorados en los semilleros. Y Jenny es un buen ejemplo. Y es una buena manera de seguir conectados con la U, de seguir conectados con sus profes. Por supuesto, es un tema muy individual, pero abre otro panorama a la realidad de que la formación del docente es continua, no se acaba en el pregrado, todos estamos aprendiendo todo el tiempo.
Muchas gracias, profe. Y a partir de esta participación, entonces ahora haciendo relación a cómo la participación en semillero de investigación afecta en esa forma positiva en nuestra formación docente, en esa construcción de nuestra identidad. De acuerdo a los hallazgos también como participante e investigadora de nuestro proyecto de Novice Teachers, de la construcción de identidad de maestros principiantes a partir de la participación en semilleros de investigación, es el nombre del proyecto, hemos encontrado de que esa participación en los semilleros nos permiten, por ejemplo, reconocer nuestros contextos académicos, tener una visión más a profundidad de las necesidades, de las habilidades, de las falencias, del desarrollo que podemos llevar a cabo en nuestra aula de clase. No llegar, soy el profe, el conocimiento o el tema de hoy es ese, ¿no? Sino entrar a indagar, ¿no? Con nuestros estudiantes, crear esa comunidad de aprendizaje que hemos mencionado, reconocernos los unos a los otros, tener ese tipo de vínculo que manejamos, por ejemplo, en nuestro semillero de investigación. Relacionarnos con el alumno, con el contexto, con todo el ámbito educativo en el que nos encontramos. Y de esa manera poder, sí, tener esa conciencia y tener esa sensibilidad, ¿no? De que no es contenido lo que vamos a ir a transmitir, sino que vamos a ir a compartir y a aprender, ¿no? Del otro, a compartir ese conocimiento, a formarnos juntos, porque el hecho de que uno tenga mayor experiencia en docencia, también se crea a partir del aprendizaje que el alumno, que el estudiante nos está brindando, ¿sí? Ese espacio que nos permite también a nosotros formarnos, crecer como personas, como docentes. Entonces, el semillero de investigación en todos sus ámbitos académicos, investigativos, y en el ámbito afectivo, personal, lo filial es lo que también nos permite ¿sí? Llegar a vivenciar también el aula, por ejemplo, y en los diferentes escenarios que nos podamos encontrar, tener ¿sí? esta otra visión, una visión diferente de vida profesional. Y entonces ha sido un proceso, la verdad, bastante enriquecedor y siempre es de la mano ¿sí? de nuestro maestro. Yo, la verdad, siempre rescato mi gratitud porque ha sido sí, este mentor, ¿no? Este rol, esa guía que tanto hemos compartido en nuestra presentación. En ello se ha convertido sí, nuestro maestro José Vicente Abad para con el semillero. Nos ha guiado, nos ha llevado siempre paso a paso y nos ha permitido sí, explorar, arriesgarnos, tener esa confianza en nosotros mismos y poder también confiar los unos a los otros en nuestro semillero y así crear todo lo que hasta hoy, gracias a Dios, en ese trabajo cooperativo hemos podido desarrollar. Muchas gracias.
Excelente.
What do you think? That's a good way to end, huh?
Yeah, that's a good way to close it. Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, with that amazingly beautiful and generous answer from Jennifer, I think we have reached the end of the second session of CodeSwitch. The questions that I know there are a lot of questions there that might have not been shared, but I know that they might be taken advantage of later on in their own seedbeds and incubators. I know that this poses a great opportunity for many of the attendees to kind of like again revisualize, because that's precisely the name of the study. It's a reconceptualizing these experiences connected to research. So with that being said, in name of the program of the bilingual education program here at the university, and from this space that is CodeSwitch, I thank you again immensely for making part of for an hour, a little bit more than an hour today. Well, we have the recording, of course, which will be available to both you and others that were not here today. And I don't know, Professor, if you have some final comments or questions.
Yeah, no, first I want to thank you for the invitation. We felt very honored for the privilege of, you opening the space for us to share some of what we do. I think the CodeSwitch idea is fantastic. So keep up with it, because it's great to learn from other people's experiences and say, oh, we're doing something similar, you know, but also, oh, we could try that. So I think that's a great initiative. So keep going with it. And one final thing that I want to say to students regarding research, because I'm also a research educator and I'm a research student. I feel that I am always learning. I don't have all the answers. I keep studying. So it's great to feel that, you know, you play the different roles all the time. But something that I do want to say about research, I think it's important to understand the whys, because sometimes it's just, oh, mandatory courses I have to take. And what's sort of disappointing or sad is when you hear people saying, I had to take this research course, but I don't understand research, or I hate research. This is something that I had to do to complete my graduation project or my thesis. But once you graduate, I have colleagues that say, do not talk to me about that. That's a bad word. I don't want to know anything about research. And I'm like, oh man, what happened there? But something that I do want to say is our reality is so complex. It's changing all the time. And in the past, you know, 30 or 40 years ago, someone could just say, teacher, could you just give me the formula, the recipe, for example, for classroom management, because my students are driving me crazy, or what is the right method to learn English? Now, our reality is so multiple and so complex that you have to come up with your own answers. Your professors have had their own experiences, but you have to build your own experiences and learn from those experiences. And something that I tell my students is, look, you could either cry and feel bad and play the victim because it's just so hard and so terrible to be a teacher, or you can start asking questions and you can start systematically looking for answers in your class and spark that curiosity and find answers by yourself. That's why we do research, to build our own answers. I think someone had a question. Mariana, maybe? I don't know. Did I see someone raising hands?
Yes, it was me, but it was a question that actually, while you were talking, like, I think that you answered it, because my question was about, I mean, it's like not so into the topic, but at the same time it is, because you are talking about code switching, but as well you're talking about semilleros de investigación. So many of us at the time of choosing a research project, we always go to the classroom project, or maybe these monografías, etc. And the ones that for me gets like lost their attention is the semilleros de investigación. So I was going to ask you, like, to give us, I mean, for me, like, give us like this reason for choosing a semillero de investigación, since many of us think about choosing a classroom project because I can do it like really quickly, like en comillas, más rápido que un semillero de investigación, porque pues para mí la idea de un semillero de investigación es que trascienda más allá de que ya termine la carrera. Entonces, como cuál sería esa, por así decirlo, motivación, aunque siempre un poquito esa respuesta.
Pero bueno, creo que viste la respuesta de Jennifer. Yo no sé cómo funciona en su universidad, si ustedes pueden hacer su trabajo de grado o su monografía desde el semillero. En la nuestra no es tan fácil. Los estudiantes de un semillero pueden ser auxiliares de un proyecto de investigación y desde ahí sí pueden hacer su trabajo de grado. También está la ruta regular que tú mencionas, los cursos regulares de investigación, que también tienen cosas fantásticas. O sea, no estamos hablando esto es lo bueno y esto es lo malo. Pero algo lindo de un semillero que yo te diría desde mi experiencia es que sí se forma una comunidad. O sea, por supuesto, también hay que cumplir ciertas condiciones. Y en esto quiero ser claro, no es que todos los semilleros sean perfectos y que todo coordinador de semillero es un mentor y que todo semillero logra en efecto ser una comunidad de aprendizaje. Hay condiciones que facilitan eso, pero la realidad es que también hay profes que abren un semillero porque necesitan estudiantes que les recojan datos. Y en 2 años el semillero se murió. Entonces también hay que ser muy honestos con el tema semilleros. Tienen sus luces, pero tienen sus sombras. Pero cuando realmente logras consolidar y crear una comunidad de aprendizaje, eso sí te pone en otro nivel de relación, en otra perspectiva de lo que es tu vida profesional. Para mí, como les decía, algo muy lindo es que yo sigo en contacto con mis graduados de semillero. Todos son profesionales, están haciendo cosas fantásticas. Algunos de manera voluntaria, como Jenny, han decidido que quieren seguir un tiempo más en el semillero y las puertas están abiertas. Su rol cambia porque ya son también formadores, ya están liderando proyectos, ya están pensando en sus posgrados. Y eso me parece interesante, pero creo que lo más destacable es tener una comunidad de aprendizaje y poder decir, crear esa relación con un mentor. Para mí eso es valiosísimo, porque tú igual puedes pasar por la carrera y tener profes súper queridos que admiras, pero tener un mentor es otra cosa. De hecho, para mí un mentor no es un rol que te asigna la universidad, como quien dice, usted va a ser el mentor. No, a usted le dan un empleo como supervisor o coordinador o tutor. Mentor es una relación pedagógica. Entonces, mentor es cuando tú como estudiante dices, este es mi mentor. Y es porque yo he logrado establecer esa relación de afecto, siempre de respeto, de guía, de aprendizaje mutuo, incluso después cuando nos volvemos colegas, de amistad. Entonces eso es lindo. Eso sí, para mí yo no lo cambiaría por nada en mi experiencia formativa. Y si le tengo que decir a un estudiante por qué, yo le diría, si puedes en un semillero, fantástico, si no, en otros espacios, pero qué rico poder tener un mentor, un docente en quien confiar, con quien te sientas identificada, con quien puedas construir relaciones a largo plazo y una comunidad de otros aprendices con los que sigues en contacto. Eso te cambia mucho la dinámica de lo que es la vida académica, la vida universitaria, que no empieza ni termina en las clases, ni termina con un grado, sino que se expande y que toca otros aspectos de la vida. Entonces, ahí está.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Gracias por la pregunta. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? I believe someone wanted to say something. I didn't notice, but I saw a microphone being opened. But all right. No, I think we're just maybe taking extra time here. So, well, with this, we close the second session. Once again, I repeat one more time. Thank you very much for coming in here. This space here is open for you. This home that is ours here, Licenciatura, is also in a space for you to feel welcome anytime, any case that you might want to reach out. Very obliged from our side. So, well, let us say now goodbye and until next time.
Yeah, please keep in touch. Maybe you can be our guest at Luis Amigo and participate in our classes.
Absolutely. It'll be my pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about your experience and your program, CodeSwitch, or any other thing that you might consider relevant sharing with students from our own program. That's very relevant, very important. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.